So if I start streaming on OBS now and then come over here. Hey, there we go. Yep, that worked. I just needed to change the stream key. Okay. Problem solved.
Do you by any chance have a link where I could put the stream so that I could record it that way? I'm just having trouble recording Discord. I've actually never tried to record Discord before, and it doesn't seem to be working for me. But let's see.
Yeah, I can link you. Do you want the link for the live stream after the fact, like the one that YouTube saves, or do you want it for that's currently happening?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. It doesn't need to be right now. Yeah.
Okay. Even though I don't actually think you can download it unless you have like YouTube Premium or something like that. If you were wanting to like edit it and stuff.
Actually, there is actually a browser extension I use that it's called Download Helper, and I found I can download literally any video on YouTube that way.
Oh, okay. Well, never mind then.
It's a browser extension for Firefox, so yeah.
Okay, yeah, I can send you the link afterwards then.
Okay, that's cool.
I think everything's set up then. Yeah, I think, we're live and yeah, okay. So to start this off, just for anybody that watches this, so I fucked up. I'm talking with Andrew Camden, and he lives in Korea. For some reason, time zone, the time zones did not connect in my head, and I fucked up time-wise, so we're having this conversation really late for me. But once again, I committed to it, so yeah, here we are. We're talking. Hello, Andrew.
Okay, so if we can move into, if you want to debate or something, I'm fine with that. But honestly, rather than a debate, I'd prefer to just have kind of just like a friendly conversation. I feel like those are more productive than arguments. So to begin with, one of the main things I actually started, honestly, I began working on this theory of social capitalism with a friend in the focus study dorm who's like from Germany. His father owned a metalworking corporation during my freshman year of college. So this is just an idea that I can't really take credit for it because it's an idea I've been working with other people on for basically my entire adult life. But what I figured out from talking to him, now, actually, when I met him, I just basically identified as a Marxist. I had read, Marxist stuff, and I was just like, that was my viewpoint. And then basically from becoming friends with this guy whose father literally owned a metalworking plant in Germany, I began to realize that rather than the sort of class warfare stuff that I was accustomed to, I think it's more productive to basically come up with kind of a middle way, as it were, kind of a balance between the good aspects of capitalism and the better aspects of socialism. And what I came to realize is that it's not really capitalism that is the problem. The problem is that the forms of capitalism we have are not very pro-social. The main form of capitalism we have in the West is what's called rentier capitalism, which is basically, it's a form of rent seeking. Simplified form, it's basically people who already have money get more money by doing things that don't actually contribute that much to society. A very good example of this is the housing situation. If you live in America, I'm sure that you're aware of the fact that for people in your age group, owning a home is very difficult.
We're fucked, yeah.
Like exponentially so compared to people 70 years ago. And, part of that you could blame on population, but 70 years ago, America had a population of 170 million. Today, the population is around 300 million. The prices of housing have not doubled, nor have just the sizes of the houses gone down. That would be what you'd expect from population. The price of housing has climbed exponentially. And a lot of that is due to the fact that there are major corporations, lots of business interests in the United States that are essentially buying up every house that is nailed down so that they can rent them out and make lots of money that way. I have a brother who drives a Tesla, and he doesn't own a house. He makes six figures, he drives a Tesla, but he doesn't own a house. And he'd like to own a house, but he can't. Because even if you make six figures and you drive a Tesla and you have a really good job, owning a house has become extremely difficult. So he has to pay exorbitant amounts of rent. So that's one form of capitalism that exists. It's rent seeking. Another form of capitalism that exists is investor capitalism, which is, once again, it's a way that people who already have money can get even more money. Where people who have money to invest put the money into companies and then either run the companies into the ground or make a fortune. And as you learn in business school, which is something I dabbled in a little bit. And my brother actually went to business school, hence the fact that he makes six figures, whereas I'm a language teacher. But one of the things you learn in business school is that running businesses into the ground is an acceptable thing to do if you're an investor, because if you get lucky sometimes by shaking things up and becoming extremely rich, it's okay if you destroy most of the things you use your influence in. And so to some extent in the mindset of a lot of investors, we all know the saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, with a lot of investors, it's kind of the opposite. It's more along the lines of, if it ain't broke, you're not trying hard enough. And so you always have to be looking for ways to maximize profits. And because the investment has taken on a speculative aspect, in many cases, if you make a big profit one year, you've just made a rod for your own back, because people don't buy the stock anymore because they want dividends. They buy the stock because they want to resell the stock at a higher value. So if you make a good profit, that means you need to find a way to make an even bigger profit next year, because you want the value of your stock to keep rising. That's what the investors want. And so this leads to a lot of very bad decisions that are detrimental to the long-term health of a lot of companies. It also leads to a lot of companies going under, which is fine if you're an investor, because you never invest all of your money in one place. If one of the places you invest in does something horrible, like, invents loot boxes or whatever, and turns a good profit, it doesn't matter if there are three other companies that you drove into the ground. It matters a lot to the people who work at those companies, but if you're an investor, that's honestly not your concern. And that's one of the problems with investor capitalism, is that there's a lot of externalization in investor capitalism, which what that means is finding a way to make other people pay for your mistakes. For example, a lot of companies do this. A lot of companies in the United States today do not pay their workers a living wage, such that the workers literally need government assistance in order to get by. And so what those companies have done is they found a way of externalizing their labor costs onto the broader society, meaning the government and the taxpayers. And that's a big thing that you do in investor capitalism. And of course, and this is something that anyone from a Rust Belt area can relate to, exporting jobs. Because you can reduce your labor costs by exporting jobs to places where the workers are paid less and aren't uppity and, may or may not be children. Now, if the people actually working in the company were making the decisions about what to do, I don't think most of them would say, I know, let's fire ourselves so that we can marginally increase the profit margin, so we could marginally increase our profits. But that actually does make sense from the point of view of the investors. So what I basically believe, and what I should say, or what people who have this idea believe, because as I said, I actually, even from the very beginning, I was involving other people. So I don't want to just try to suggest I'm taking credit for this. I just want ideas out here. I think people have come up with good ideas. And honestly, I think that a lot of things are kind of discovered rather than invented. So like the Joker said in The Dark Knight, I'm not a monster, I'm just ahead of the curve. And in this case, I'd say I'm not a visionary. I'm just seeing where things are going in a way that just about anyone can. So what I think we need to do as an alternative to communism, to fascism, to late-stage capitalism, to techno-feudalism, etc., lots of isms that are creating problems, is we need to develop a form of capitalism that is pro-social, a form of capitalism that has the benefits of capitalism with fewer of the disadvantages. So to get into that now, with regards to housing, Basically, I think a concentration of power is a very bad thing. And I think that's true politically. We all recognize that politically. I mean, what form of politics has the greatest concentration of power? I mean, I realize I'm talking and not really listening here, but for example, what would you epitomize as an excessive concentration of power in the political sphere? What word would you use for that?
Totalitarianism, I suppose.
Yeah, totalitarianism, dictatorship, things of that nature. And those things are problematic because they concentrate too much power in the hands of a small number of people, or possibly one person. And so I think I think the same is true of economics as well. When too much power is concentrated in the hands of too small a number of people, it's dangerous. And it's not just that it's dangerous economically, but it's also dangerous politically. Let me see here.
Right. Well, so real quick on the power part. So when you mentioned that in our emails, I was a little curious. So it seems like you wouldn't say that we have enough of a power distribution nowadays.
Yeah.
Well, so between the checks and balances we have between the legislative branch, executive, and judicial, the fact that voters do have quite a bit of say, which in and of itself spreads out the power amongst quite a few people, right? It seems like America already has a few systems established to make sure that that power is distributed. What else do you think we should incorporate?
And you know what? You're very right. And I think part of the reason that the American system has lasted for 200 years is that there has been a substantial distribution of power throughout American history. As you pointed out, there are the different branches of government. That's some level of distribution of power. The fact that America has, through most of its history, been at least somewhat democratic is a distribution of power. So yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that everything in America is as bad as it possibly could be. That's not my point.
Right.
My point is that concentration of power is bad, and unfortunately, it's increasing. As inequality increases, that leads to an increasing concentration of power. And this is a phenomenon that has been observed for literally thousands of years. I was raised in a religious household, and I read the entire Bible before I was done with grade school. But one of the things that I found in the Bible that was actually very interesting is they had a tradition called the Jubilee year. When the land was originally distributed, it was distributed on an even, of course, in a first wave economy, land is the way that wealth is produced. That's the source of wealth in a first wave agricultural economy. And it was distributed on an even basis. Basically, everyone was supposed to get a roughly equal share of land according to the size of their family. And they even said that specifically that foreigners, like non-Jews who lived in the country, should also receive an allotment of land. And the land was actually illegal to sell the land. You could lease it, but you couldn't sell it. And the reason for that was that during the Jubilee year, all of the land was supposed to go back to its original owners, because it was recognized even back literally thousands of years ago that if you just allow rich people to keep getting more and more and more land and you never reset that, you'll eventually end up with a society where most people are effectively, if not slaves, certainly in a bad position. Something else that was supposed to happen during the Jubilee year was that all slaves were supposed to be freed, all debts were supposed to be canceled, so forth. So there was a periodic social leveling of society built into the system in the Hebrew Bible, what Christians refer to as the Old Testament. Unfortunately, that didn't continue. According to the Hebrew Bible, what happened is that rich people convinced the king to cancel the Jubilee year.
So just to clarify, for my own sake, so of course we couldn't literally do something like that nowadays. That would wreck our economy. We wouldn't be even close to competitive on the world stage. So I'm guessing you're gonna draw this out to something else, something more like that could work in today's world. Yeah, is that?
I think having periodic debt cancellation and have saying all debts are canceled every so many years might be a good idea. I think that would actually be workable.
But not like a total reset, because if we got rid of let's say established businesses and stuff like that overnight, or at least got rid of took away people's ownership of those businesses and stuff, that would lead to tons of chaos.
Oh no, I'm not advocating that at all. And by the way, actually not me. These are kind of my ideas, but someone else put them in. But in the International Hobbitry group, there's basically a list of the points. Actually, honestly, last night I was talking to some people and we just kind of put together a list of what are essentially points. And you won't find that there. No, I'm merely citing the Jubilee year in the Hebrew Bible as an example of the fact that even thousands of years ago, people recognized that inequality had a tendency to progress and get worse over time.
Okay.
Unless you did something to restrain it.
I just wanted to
So that's actually the point, is that we need to do something to place limits on inequality. Because if you don't place limits on it, it just continually gets worse. And that means that you have a continually increasing concentration of power.
So, what do you think, real quick, before you continue? What do you think about basic ideas that have been around for a while, like well, just simple wealth redistribution, like taxing the rich quite a bit more, significantly more than the middle class, and of course the lower class, things like that. I understand there are a lot of problems in the way of that, but of course, when it comes to trying to get any sort of like policy like that pushed forward, there's always going to be hitches and like roadblocks and stuff. Like, do you think if we just made more of a push towards something like that, just like more taxation when it comes to rich people, or maybe hell, even like a cap on the amount of wealth you are allowed to accumulate, would things like that maybe?
Now you are speaking my language. Actually, that's exactly what I believe. Except for the part about taxing. I'll get into that in a moment. But I basically saw an interview where Ben Shapiro and Andrew Yang were talking to each other. And they basically agreed that both of them, Andrew Yang and Ben Shapiro aren't like exactly the same person, but they both agreed that raising taxes on the rich in our current political system won't work because the rich have so much accumulated power over the political system that if you raise taxes, they'll just find a loophole and not pay their taxes.
It is hard. Yeah.
This is unfortunately true. Actually, under President Trump, I think it was something like under President Trump, I think the number of like, of major corporations that pay literally zero taxes, I think it rose to something like 30. I mean, don't quote me on that, but we actually have an epidemic now of major companies or just very rich people who pay little or no taxes because the tax system is so riddled with loopholes. So I would actually advocate simplifying the tax system by just saying that there is a flat tax of 10% on all revenue, not profits, but just all the money you take in from whatever source. 10% of that automatically goes to the government in a form of taxes, which is a very simple system. But what I think that's potentially good because it's hard to cheat on. I recognize the value of a graduated income tax. I understand the reasoning behind it. The thing is, I believe that the more complex the tax system is, the more people who have wealth and power will just find a way around it. Essentially,
right,
end up paying lower taxes.
More loopholes the more you add onto it. I was wondering. So, what triggered in my head when you said like a flat 10%? I don't know if I necessarily have an issue with that. Never mind. I'm sorry. Keep going.
The key thing, it has to be a tax on revenue, not revenue after expenses or not profits or whatever, because Donald Trump basically never pays taxes because he always finds ways to lose money. So he actually officially doesn't have anything he has to pay taxes on. So if you want to keep people from cheating on taxes, you have to tax revenue as opposed to profits or revenue minus expenses or something of that nature. And at that point, the taxes just becomes a business expense. It might mean, for example, that you just, raise the prices of your products by an average of 10% or something of that nature. But that wouldn't actually happen for most products anyway. But I would advocate simplifying the tax system in that way, both to just greatly reduce the amount of bureaucracy involved and also just to ensure that it's hard to cheat on. But with regards to limits on wealth, I do agree with you. And what I think is actually good to prevent, to basically hold inequality down to manageable levels. I think the idea of, keeping everyone perfectly equal, which has been tried before, that's actually how that's how monks lived in most medieval communities. That's the monastic lifestyle. Everyone's perfectly equal to the point that everyone even has the same haircut. And of course, over time that became corrupted and you ended up with certain people who had way too much wealth. But that's one of the ideals of monastic life, some sort of perfect equality. Literally, the reason why they had that weird haircut is that way people who have male pattern baldness won't look different from other folks. Because everyone has male pattern baldness now. But I don't think that's reasonable. I don't think it's reasonable to expect people to be perfectly equal. And I don't think people are perfectly equal. I think everyone's different. And a system that tries to force everyone to be exactly the same is, I don't think I need to tell you all of the various historical reasons why that's not likely to end well.
I more or less, yeah. I think I have a decent grasp on that.
What I do think is that I think people need to be kept within the same neighborhood. I think there should be reasonable limits on inequality. And I think a good way of achieving that would be to have a minimum wage and a maximum income linked by a ratio. I think 1 to 5 would be a good one. Like a 1 to 5 ratio. So basically the maximum income would be like 5 times the minimum wage. And that way that's not perfect equality. If you're earning 5 times as much as your brother, that's a lot more money than he has. And you do have an incentive to work harder and try harder to get to the top of that, to get to the top bracket. But it prevents it from getting out of control. It prevents you from having an absurd situation where you have, Jeff Bezos going to space and the people in his warehouses who are not taking bathroom breaks or not washing their hands after bathroom breaks, because they don't have time, because they're afraid of being fired if they take the time to wash their hands after the bathroom. So when you unpack something from Amazon, it's been touched by someone who didn't wash their hands.
Well, yeah, and like I said, I'm for like strong worker protections. A work environment that makes it hard to even just go to the bathroom is obviously unacceptable. Sorry, I was oh my goodness, what did you just? Once again, I'm. It's literally like my bedtime. I'm trying to.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry if you.
No.
If you'd like to stop here and maybe continue another day, we might do that.
No. Sorry, I'm just trying to remember. My mind hitched on something, and then you started talking about the Amazon warehouse, and and my mind went okay, the 1.5. There we go. I'm back. I feel like that creates an issue with like disincentive when it comes to like innovation or like trying to like create businesses and stuff like that. Like for instance, would you say like a CEO or not a CEO, sorry, like a founder, someone who established a business? Do you really think them only earning like 5 times the minimum wage maximum, even if their business is potentially pulling in like millions or billions of dollars, is that truly fair?
Well, you see, the thing is if you make a good point there. So if a CEO of a business pulling in billions of dollars, okay, he's probably has a lot of people working for him. I don't think very many people pull in billions of dollars just from working alone on OnlyFans or whatever.
Oh no!
Okay.
And by the way, I meant the business like in its entirety, not the founder himself.
Yeah. So okay. So like the business is pulling in billions of dollars. How much does the founder of the business need? Okay, well, if the founder of the business is getting 5 times what the people working for him are, he's being well compensated. And
well, yeah, but like when it comes to disincentives, I feel like if 5 times the like above minimum wage is the best you're gonna get, like why would you bother to put all the work into like establish your own business when you could probably it would be easier to like work up to that 5 times like the minimum wage part, like probably by just climbing the corporate ladder in some other business, right? Like I feel like that kind of creates a bit of an issue with like competition and like establishing new businesses and stuff.
Well, you do have a certain amount of a point there. Actually, I think there would be a little bit of a disincentive there, and to some extent, I think that's a good thing. Now, hear me out for this one. This is maybe a harder pill to swallow, but if there's no limit to how much money you can get, then for a lot of people, that means there's no limit to what they will do to get money.
Well, I'm not necessarily.
And that's actually not a good thing, because people who want to get more money, people who already have too much money but still want more even after that, are destroying the world in lots of different ways.
I would agree. Yeah.
So, and that's how you end up with child labor. That's how you end up like, I noticed, I assume that you play games sometimes. That's why we have wonderful innovations like loot boxes, things of that nature. People actually can be too creative when it comes to finding ways of getting too much money. And so I feel like some level of disincentive where, you get up to a certain level, you get enough money, you get 5 times as much money as other people have. But then after that, you can't really make yourself richer. I feel like most people would work as hard as they should in order to stay in order to stay on top. I think there would be perhaps a little bit less of an incentive for people who already were on top to find new and horrifying ways of getting even more. But,
right, but it's not just new.
To the extent that's a disincentive, I think that might actually be a good thing. There is actually something else, though.
Well, before we move on from that, just real quick, I'm sorry. It's not just like a mild disincentive. Like once you hit, and that's kind of the problem with putting like a cap on wealth overall, is that like once you hit the top, there's like almost no reason to like try any harder. It's kind of like, well, like you're working at like a dead end job.
What you're saying is once you get to the top of the hill, why would you work to stay on top of it?
Well, no, it's okay. Here, let me try to explain it a different way. It's kind of like have you ever been working at like a corporate job or like a stupid fast food restaurant or something like that? And at first you're working really hard, right? You're trying to show your boss like, hey, you know, I'm like a competent, good worker or whatever. But then you look around at all of your other coworkers and they're being like the laziest pieces of shit ever. And you're like, dude, we're getting paid the same. Why am I putting in like twice the amount of effort here? Like, and then you end up like, there's literally an incentive to not work as hard. Like that's. I kind of feel like that's
no, that would be an issue if everyone was getting paid the same. I think if you're getting paid 5 times as much as those other people who aren't doing as good a job, then you have an incentive to do a good job so that you continue to get the 5 times as much.
Well,
I think once you get to the top of the hill, you have an incentive to stay on top of the hill.
Right, you have an incentive to maintain that, yes, but like there's no real push for like any sort of oh my god, the word is just escaping me. Innovation, there we go. Or trying to create more. I understand that can lead to other problems.
Okay. Well, you are right to a point, and I agree that if there is just an absolute limit, that would be a problem. But I don't know if you can see this in the what is it? The International Hobbitry group chat, the Capitalist Manifesto section.
I saw you
Okay, yeah. So I think there does need to be something of an escape valve. So I think you would probably like to be a British lord. I'm just guessing. I'm guessing that because I know that there was that company that made a killing, like obscene amounts of money by telling suckers that they could get the title of lord if they gave money to, you know, these people had supposedly planned a tree in your name. What was it called? I forget, but it was a scam.
Okay, I haven't heard of it.
But here's the thing. Earnings above the maximum income, I think that you still could actually earn more than the maximum income, but you won't be able to keep all of it. You keep up to 5 times the minimum wage. After that, the money that you get beyond that is it can be given to individuals of your choice. Like you can give it to your family. You know, maybe raise everyone in your family up to, you know, 5 times the minimum wage in terms of their wealth, or you can donate.
Huh.
Yeah, but that would distribute the power, and you see that the danger of letting one person have too much money is that you have concentration of power. If you're giving the money beyond the maximum to other people, then the wealth is getting distributed. So you don't have as much dangerous concentration of power as you do, for example, with Jeff Bezos, you know, like having, you know, trillions of dollars, which is an existential threat to democracy, in my opinion. There's other...
To an extent, well, real quick. So there was something I want to go quite a ways back here to something you brought up when it came to like the loot boxes. There we go. So I understand that when it comes to competition in the marketplace, things can get really disgusting really, really fast. But through that exact same process, we get some amazing innovations and some like genuine, like really good things for people. Some pretty decent improvements when it comes to like quality of life and stuff like that.
That's a good point.
Well, so like what I think I'm on the side of. I will take that bad and hopefully try to limit it as much as possible to get that innovation, to get that push forward, I suppose. That's kind of where I'm standing right now.
Now here's the thing. I think people will be significantly innovative in order to get 5 times what other people have. I don't think, like, I don't know about you, but I'd be willing to work harder or, you know, just try to come up with more ideas to get 5 times as much money as the people around me, even if I knew I was never going to be a billionaire. If I could increase my income by a factor of, you know, by 500% by doing something, I would do it. But there is another point here is that I agree with you that there's a lot of innovation that really improves people's lives. Do you think that good innovation, that positive innovations are motivated purely by the desire for more money?
I think it starts off probably like with more just like really, really loving creation for a lot of people, and then it drifts towards money after a while. I feel like that's kind of where.
You see, I think this is one of the problems with our system is that we kind of make money the only the end all of everything. And this is partly because the prices go up too much. Like, here's one of the downsides of other people having a lot of money. It's inflation. Part of the reason why it's impossible to live in Manhattan unless you're rich is because rich people have too much money and they can pay too much money for housing arrangements in Manhattan. And so because if one person gets too much money, especially for a finite commodity like housing or something, that means that it goes out of reach for everyone else. So the actual buying power of money goes down for most people when rich people get too much of it. But I think there's a lot of innovation that's actually driven by desires for things other than money. I think for example, my brother is a game developer, and he's very much motivated by the desire to make good games.
Oh, real quick, that is the most best wizard you're talking about, right? Or do you have another brother?
No, I have 3 brothers and 14 cousins.
Okay. By the way, the most best wizard.
A number of friends.
I love talking to him, but he's also like, every time I see one of his comments on my videos, I'm like, oh, I gotta prepare myself. He challenges me a lot.
Okay.
I know. I like it. I like being challenged by people that are well spoken. It's nice, but also frustrating at times.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm going to try to avoid talking about our mutual friend, as it were. It's been my experience that it's generally a good idea not to volunteer information about other people because you never know what they're going to get offended by. So, I'm just going to okay. I just want to steer the conversation away from that.
I just to let you know, like I shouted him out in one of my videos. Like I appreciate him being.
Oh, that's nice.
Or anything. Not okay. That it does that much because I'm still a small creator, but like I'm sorry, I didn't mean any offense or anything like that. And I hope he doesn't take it that way.
No. I'm not offended at all. I'm just explaining that
you might say, yeah, you don't want to. I get you.
Okay. That actually reminds me of something I saw before. I was in a Discord group where there was a trans person in the Discord group, and then the moderator actually outed the person as trans in front of everyone. And afterwards, it's like, I told you that in confidence. I was like, you see, this is an example of why you should never volunteer information about other people, because just because someone tells you something doesn't mean they're comfortable with the entire internet knowing it.
Right, so it can be pretty hard sometimes. I worked a job with my brother, and it can be surprisingly difficult not to just like when you're talking to somebody you're super comfortable with, not to like just drop some stuff and then be like, it's just hard. Yeah, it could be hard. Yeah. So I think that's smart. Yeah, you're taking the smarter route. Yeah.
So I just basically make a rule: don't volunteer information about other people. As a general rule, like my brother, who is a game developer, I know he's okay with me talking about that because I literally asked him. I was like, "Do you mind me telling people that I have a brother who's a game developer?" He's like, "No, go ahead and say it." But like I know he's driven by a desire to make good games, and I also know he likes money. He drives a Tesla. But I know he would do his best to make the best game he could, even if he were not a millionaire, which he isn't. He makes 6 figures. He doesn't make 7 figures. He would do the best he could to make the best game possible if he was making 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures, 9 figures. Once you get to the point of having a lot of money, the more money is motivating if you're a greedy person and you're out to get the money. I don't think the best people or the best human efforts are motivated by a desire of already rich people to get even more money. But the desire to get more money is a real thing. And this is something that comes into here. A very large number of corporations, a lot of the shareholders in those corporations, the individual shareholders are not like billionaires and stuff. There's a lot of relatively like middle class people who own a bit of stock.
Well, right, but usually when we think of shareholders, we think of like the majority holders, right?
Yeah. So here's the thing: you can if most CEOs, they want to keep their jobs, and that means that they want to make as much money as possible for their shareholders. And so if you're a CEO and you're only making 5 times what someone on the ground floor is, well, I think you are going to probably try to put in your best work so that you continue to be the CEO, and you want to keep making money for your shareholders, even if your shareholders themselves, if no one of your shareholders is making more than 5 times the wage. If there's millions of shareholders, I think that's actually a good thing, because that means there's lots of people who have money to spend. And something we do actually know from economic history, this might be interesting to you, but in the post-war era, a lot of economists actually predicted that Latin American countries would develop faster than Asian countries. And the reason they predicted this is that there was this belief among economists of the time that concentration of wealth was a good thing for economic development, because if rich people have a lot of extra money that they don't know what to do with, they'll invest it. And so they thought there would be more investment and more development in societies that had higher levels of inequality. And so they predicted that Latin American economies would outpace Asian economies. And that made sense in the 1950s, but as we all know today, the exact opposite happened. Because it's not, the development of wealth is not just a matter of investment, which, by the way, can be done by regular people saving money and buying a little bit of stock, or putting it in a bank that buys stock or something of that nature, or a mutual fund or whatever. It's also driven by consumption. This is actually an increasing problem that the American economy is starting to have now, is that there are a lot of people who just can't afford to buy stuff. And that's actually really bad for the economy. When you have a few people with lots of wealth who are just basically hoarding it, and then when you have large numbers of people who can't afford to buy things, that actually does not produce rapid economic growth or development. What it actually produces is stagnation. And that's actually the norm in a lot of Latin American economies, which is part of why a lot of Latin American economies have remained mired in comparatively low levels of development, in contrast to the Asian tiger economies, where wealth was more distributed and consumption really grew. But the other thing is that I do agree with you that having an absolute limit, you can go no further, is a bad thing. And that's why I suggested that there should be an escape valve, basically, where you can donate the money you can give the money to other people. You can make all of your friends as rich as you are. You can make all of your family as rich as you are. You can transform your community, and that's another thing. In addition to, being able to give it to other people, you can also donate it to science, community development, education, etc. And I think there should actually be a procedure for actually receiving titles of nobility from this. I think that it's actually good in a sense to have a sort of nobility with advisory powers, because that gives people something to aspire to. And if the nobility has advisory authority rather than sovereignty, like if they can basically advise but not actually compel, then they don't become tyrants, but they do become something that people can aspire to, and they can become a source of stability. So I actually think that people who basically manage to produce a lot of wealth and then donate that wealth to like education or community development or science or whatever, something, something worthy, should get titles of nobility for that, like benefactor of science, city father of Chicago, benefactor of education, whatever.
And just to make sure, this is still under the framework of our republic, right? We still more or less have the same republic. Is that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very much. I'm talking about within a republic, but you can have a nobility and even a monarchy. Republic, Norway, for example, they have a king.
But it's also interesting if you reach a certain point, being able to advise. I suppose, like what, congressman, the president, maybe, or like.
Oh yeah, and you see, this is
local figures.
This is what I believe. I believe the lords should have advisory powers as opposed to sovereignty. In other words, they can call meetings. They can issue reports. Basically, they have an official position, and they can share their opinion. And their opinion kind of matters because they do have an official position. But they don't have any legal authority. In other words, they don't have sovereignty.
So I would say, actually, when it comes to that, if there was any like organizing and like giving speeches, stuff like that, it would probably end up that most people didn't care too much if there wasn't anything to back it. You know what I mean?
Okay, well, here we'll give an example. I think about boxes a lot because my brother's a game developer. But for example, imagine if the House of Lords of the United States were to issue a report saying that loot boxes are dangerous to young people and should be prohibited. If the House of Lords issues this report, that doesn't mean that loot boxes are automatically illegal, but it would put pressure on various people, like, people in Congress, the president, whatever, to maybe do something about that. So the fact that the House of Lords takes a stand on that issue can kind of move things along there, even if they don't actually have sovereignty, even if they don't have legal authority to just compel action.
This is a like hypothetical system. It just depends on how much these citizens are like bought into that idea. Yeah, I'm not. That's definitely unique. I don't think I've ever heard anything like that before. But so
I would go further. I think we should have a king. But I think the king or the monarch should also be someone who has advisory authority. And this is, by the way, in contrast to the British. In the British system, because they have that long history of the monarch being a tyrant, with the Star Chamber and whatnot, the monarch is specifically cautioned to avoid saying things, making statements on politics or anything of that nature. The queen is supposed to be a pretty lamp, and she's supposed to keep her mouth shut. In fact, they even have a ceremony in the British Parliament where someone who comes as a messenger of the monarch, and the Parliament slams the door in their face, like part of one of their ceremony. I think we should even have a monarch, but the monarch should be an elected monarch, elected from the House of Lords. That basically the House of Lords, who are not people who inherited their position, but people who, did something great and managed to, by doing something great, contribute a lot of money to community or science or whatever. These lords then choose from among them a monarch, who then is elected for life, unless they're impeached for doing something awful, who is elected for life, and then that the monarch, like the House of Lords, has advisory powers, meaning they can issue public statements and do their best to try to be the conscience of the nation, but they don't actually have legal authority.
So I feel like this starts off with something I can get on board with. I think we should have like medals, awards, stuff like that for like rich people doing good stuff, essentially, to promote that behavior. They're probably doing it for selfish reasons, but that's not really what's important. The fact that they're doing something good is what matters there. So I agree, having something to recognize that good thing is good, and usually pushes like those rich people to do good things with their money, or at least to some extent. But then when it comes to the advisory stuff, well, especially since like, do we really want to legitimize particular people when it comes to our government? There's that too. I'm not sure. And also, I don't know like how that would really have an effect, I guess, over. I understand you think it would put pressure on like companies, maybe politicians, whatever they end up like drawing their focus to, but it seems like kind of unnecessary, I guess.
Worst case scenario, well, yeah, but you see, worst case scenario, it basically gives the rich people, something for. It basically gives the rich people a reason to feel important, without actually dominating and ruining people's lives. So worst case scenario, you basically then, I would much rather have Lord Jeff Bezos. I'd rather have King Jeff Bezos, who, who has a limited amount of wealth that he actually directly controls. I would rather live in a society where I don't like Jeff Bezos very much, but I would rather live in a society where Donald Trump was king than live in a society in which billionaires drive up the cost of housing to make it impossible for ordinary people to own their own house.
Right, just to make sure I'm clear on this. So you would have the 5 times minimum wage. That's the max you'll ever be able to make, and then to kind of satisfy that want to keep that
to keep building and
stuff,
yeah,
you would introduce this. Okay.
So it's basically to provide people with an incentive to keep going after they get to the top, but in a way that won't actually allow them to actually dominate people's lives, but just a way that will allow them to feel important and possibly, and sometimes they might be important. Sometimes they will have good advice. Even a broken clock is right twice a day, as they say. And every now and then I hear Bloomberg or one of these American oligarchs say something that I actually agree with. And if they had less time to think about, if they had more time to think about coming up with smart things to say, I think they could actually do a better job of that.
Well, so
But
here, how about this? So
can I
when
continue?
when it comes to, sorry, did you ask if you could continue? Is that?
No, I want you to continue.
Oh, okay,
I
okay.
want you to speak now.
Okay, sorry, I didn't. Yeah, I just want to make sure I didn't like step on your toes or anything. Anyways, so I would say when it comes to that sort of system to kind of like honor people and give them something to like strive for. I I can see where you're coming from there. That could potentially work. But I think ultimately, overall, with the system, my sticking point would be once again, just it seemed well. I'm not entirely. I guess I'm not sure. I still feel like innovation would be an issue, or like especially trying to get things up to the scale we have them at today. Like we have a massive economy because of that selfish, that greedy behavior, right? We've been able to like build up one of the world's greatest economies. I'm not sure if you could ever match it with that sort of system. And if we did move to that system, it doesn't guarantee that anybody else in the world would, and we could potentially put ourselves behind drastically. And essentially die out, right? Because if you're not as efficient, if you're not as like, I guess, if you're not as fit as the other countries, then you're not going to survive, right? Something else will take over.
Yes, I think that's true. However, I think if you look at the course of history, you'll generally see that societies that have the highest levels of inequality also tend to be the societies that fail the hardest, especially in direct competition. Like, if you look at, for example, the United States, the early United States, in comparison to Mexico and the various Latin American countries that the United States curb stomped. One of the key differences was in the early United States, you had lots of distributed power. You had lots of people with small amounts of wealth. You had lots of small farmers. In the Spanish-speaking countries, you had the conquistador legacy, and you had extremely high levels of inequality. And what happened was that even though Mexico started out as a much bigger country than the United States with far more resources, the United States, which I'm not saying the early United States was a paradise, and in all fairness, we did kind of start the Mexican War. I'm just trying to point out that the fact that the United States so thoroughly eclipsed Mexico with its comparatively high levels of inequality indicates to me that societies with greater levels of equality tend to be more competitive, not less competitive. If I can use an even older historical analogy.
Could I just
go on.
Quick, when it comes to the American-Mexican War? So we had guns. First off, I don't know. Did they didn't? I'm trying to think. Also, we had America split? Oh no, I have so many questions out. They're popping up in my head. Here, enlighten me. Were guns widespread in Mexico at that time? First off.
Okay. Yeah, the Mexicans had guns, but the Spanish had guns. Mexicans certainly had guns. Declared independence from the Spanish. The Americans did have a better supply of guns. They did have a better supply of guns because the Mexican War, early 19th century.
Yeah, mid 19th century. It looks like. Okay.
Yeah. America did have a better supply of guns, and you're right there. America actually, although Mexico started out with more resources than the United States by far, America developed industrially more than Mexico did, in much the same way that the Asian countries have developed more industrially than the Latin American countries during the 20th century. You can even see this, and let me be 100% clear on this. I'm not going to defend Stalin here. Stalin killed more socialists than just about anyone except Hitler.
Oh, actually, no. Defend Stalin. I've been waiting for a socialist that like full on is just like, dude, yeah, Russia was awesome. Like
So before I feel like I need to say that because I don't want to be confused here. I'm proposing social capitalism, not a tanky.
Right. No, I think you've made that clear. Yeah, keep going.
But the Soviet Union actually was far stronger than Tsarist Russia, and that was over a space of only about 20 years. The Tsarist Russia, even with Britain and France still in the war, Tsarist Russia still couldn't fight the Germans. The Soviet Union accounted for roughly 3/4 of the German army. Roughly 3/4 of the Wehrmacht ended up fighting on the Eastern Front. And it was the Soviets who actually captured Berlin in the end. The Soviet Union was a much stronger country than Tsarist Russia was. The Soviet Union, by the way, was also a much stronger country than current day Russia is. And what quite a few people would have told you in World War I is that Tsarist Russia was so weak because of the very high levels of inequality that prevented real development. Because when you have a very high level of inequality, what you very often get is you get a situation in which people who are already rich kind of rest on their laurels and continue to get more rich. And social mobility declines. And that is unfortunately happening in the United States today. The United States today is becoming more and more like a Latin American country every day. And I don't mean I'm not like a cultural or, I'm not saying this like from a racist point of view. I'm saying in the sense of having an economy in which there is a very small number of people with lots of power and a low level of social mobility. Social mobility is actually declining in the United States, and that's actually
that's always been an issue to an extent, right? Isn't there a concept like stickiness at the end? It's really hard if you're born poor to move up, and if you're rich, it's really hard to fall, right?
Absolutely, this is a thing. The United States used to have a higher level of social mobility than most European countries. In the past, the United States used to be a country where people who were not born high could get ahead more easily than they could in places like Europe, which is one of the reasons why people would come to the United States, is because they knew there was a higher level of social mobility there. Now social mobility in America is actually lower than most European countries. And that's actually typical of Latin American countries, by the way. Very low levels of social mobility. Now, as social mobility declines, competence declines. Because one of the things that causes people to become competent is a high level of social mobility, which means you have lots of people competing for the highest positions. But as social mobility declines, then it becomes easier and easier for someone who's incompetent to essentially keep failing upward. And we see that increasingly in the United States today. This is actually the rut that China got itself stuck into, not recently, but prior to being humiliated and colonized, was the Confucian system eventually essentially ended social mobility, because the Confucian system was based, in theory, originally it was actually supposed to increase social mobility. The idea is that just the smart people will be running everything because they're the ones who get the high scores. But what ended up happening is this meant rich people spent literally all of their childhood preparing for exams. And that meant that you wouldn't have a chance on those exams unless you were basically a rich person who basically didn't do any real work and just spent all your life preparing for the exams to get the highest scores.
Right.
And this produced in China a very bad situation, both in terms of having very low levels of competence. The late Manchu dynasty was comically incompetent in just about every way. But it also meant that the rich people had essentially no connection to the people they were ruling over. Because instead of spending their time, like visiting peasants, figuring out how to improve things, they literally just spent all of their time learning exams. And so you ended up with an upper class that was completely disconnected from the lower class and extremely low levels of competence. And this is something which I think happens more or less, there are many factors that go into this, but this is something I think that happens in any society where there is where you don't put limits on inequality. Is that as inequality increases, that means people who start out with more power can get more power, and that's what you'll see in just about any free market simulation. You might have experienced this when you were a kid. If you play a game of Monopoly and you start one person out with more money, they're going to win. That's just how it works. And this is actually, interestingly enough, there's a good video on this topic called "How Wealth Changes People" that touches on this a little bit. You can watch it later by George Rockwell.
Yeah, please link me whatever you want. You've already given me a lot to think about. Also, after you link that, if there are any other points you want to cover before we end, I can only go for maybe another 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay.
Oh, no. I know. I'm sorry. Once again, this was all my mistake. This any sort of clusterfuckiness here is completely because of me. So.
Okay. A couple of points then I think I do want to get in. I sent you a video on the topic. One is that the American political system, unfortunately, now is. Oh wow! What just happened here? Can you hear me? Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right. So we've now reached the point at which inequality has effectively ended democracy. We now effectively have an auction rather than a real republic.
Okay, I do want to just super quick because I want to let you get to your other points, but I hear this so much that people think that like voting doesn't seem to matter because like businesses are like essentially paying the politicians to have them do whatever the fuck. But I mean, it seems like politicians still have to answer to their voter base to an extent in order to get reelected, and it doesn't seem like we have a bunch of politicians going in just to get a bunch of money and not run for reelection. Does that make sense?
Okay, well, here's an example. Barack Obama, he was making six figures before he became president. And then when he finished being president, he bought a palatial estate on Martha's Vineyard, which would make a European noble jealous. And he did this in one of the most expensive places in the world to buy a house. And then he threw a lavish birthday party that actually violated lockdown, for people of his wealth, laws or suggestions. The reason he was able to do that is after being president, he collected vast amounts of speaking fees. And the thing with these speaking fees is what they actually are is they're basically bribes after the fact. When Barack Obama was president, he put the very people who, he literally took people from these banks and corporations, put those people in charge of regulating the banks and corporations. Then after they finished their stint in the government, they went back to the same banks and corporations they had worked at before they were in the government. So they literally just basically did an internship in the government and regulated themselves. Then after Barack Obama finishes being president, they then pass him an incredible amount, and which is disguised as speaking fees. Like, if you'll show up, we'll give you $600,000 to have lunch. And it's a system of what is effectively institutional bribery. But that's not actually the biggest problem. Bribery of people who are already elected is not the biggest problem. Larry Lessig, who's a Harvard professor who basically focuses on studying democracy, that's actually the first link I sent you, is his TED Talk. But he's, if you look into him, he's very interesting. He's a Harvard professor who's an expert on democracy. And what he actually found is that there is literally no statistical correlation between what ordinary voters want and what the government actually does. There's not a statistically significant correlation between those two. And this is actually government research that shows this. Yeah, I really recommend watching that video. I sent you a link on Larry Lessig, basically why democracy no longer serves the people.
Okay, so things like that huge infrastructure bill Biden got passed, stuff like so like, or just I'm just going to focus strictly on that. So you're saying that there were outside reasons that got him to do that, and it just so happened to align with potentially what his base would have wanted? Is that?
I don't have enough information to make a statement about a specific bill or a specific policy. I just know that the research which he found, which was originally government research, shows that there's not a statistically significant correlation between what ordinary people want and what the government does.
Okay,
however, there is a correlation.
Okay.
There is and it blew my mind when I saw it and sent me to thinking a lot of things. But I recommend watching that. Dr. Larry Lessig, he's a Harvard professor. He's spent his whole life studying democracy, why it works, or some cases why it doesn't work. Okay. But there is actually a correlation, though. There's an almost perfect correlation between what the less than 1% of Americans who donate the maximum to political primaries want and what the government actually does. Because in America, and this is unfortunately a way in which America is starting to resemble the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union actually had elections, but they didn't matter because the election that really mattered was the one that took place within the party. Because of the death grip the Communist Party had in power in the Soviet Union, although they did have elections, just as often as any Western democratic country had elections, the election itself was essentially a rubber stamp because the leaders had already been picked from within the party before the election happened. So the election was essentially just a rubber stamp for whoever the party chose. In America, we have a similar system, which is that the people who donate the most to political primaries have really all of the power, because it doesn't matter once you win the political primaries, it doesn't really, the election itself is almost a formality, especially if you donate to both parties. which is a thing that the donor class actually does. They will basically donate to political primaries in both parties to ensure that whoever wins the general election, it will be someone who leans to the green, as they say. Leans to the green, meaning leans towards the donor class. So as a result of this, we have a system in which the donor class essentially has a death grip on power, and that's the less than 1% of Americans who donate the maximum to political primary. They have essentially a death grip on power, and the general election is it's almost like choosing. It's almost cosmetic. It's like which corrupt rich old white guy do you want to do almost exactly the same thing? The policies between the people don't actually differ nearly as much as they ought to, because they've both been picked by the same donor class. A good example of this happened in my time. You may recall the war in Iraq. You're probably a kid at the time.
Yeah.
But the midterm election George W. Bush had, it was George Bush versus John Kerry. At the time of that election, the overwhelming majority of withdrawal from Iraq. However, neither George Bush nor John Kerry was willing to commit to that. Neither of the two major candidates were willing to commit to ending a war that the overwhelming majority of Americans wanted to end. So in the midterm elections, the war in Iraq kind of ended eventually in 2009, much later than it should have, because the donor class, which is tied to the military-industrial complex and all of these other nice things, has a death grip on power such that what the people want isn't actually represented unless that is congruent with what the donor class wants. And sometimes those are congruent, because the donor class are also American. They live in the same country that you and I do. Not me, I live in Korea, but live in the same country that you do. So sometimes the donor class will want what you want. And that's the only time you're going to get what you want, is when the less than 1% of Americans who donate the maximum to political campaigns want broadly the same things.
So I have a few questions on that point. So like presidential race, like Biden and Trump they're going to be going at it soon. So that is, would you take it to that level? Like the biggest election in America, it's even decided by the donors. Like the voting doesn't really matter. It's all basically predetermined. Is that?
Well, it's too early to tell, but like, let's look at the election let's look at like the 2016 election. Just about every poll showed Bernie Sanders versus Trump being a victory for Bernie Sanders. But that didn't happen because the donor class decided that Hillary Clinton was going to be the candidate. And so the actual election was Trump versus Hillary. A democratic socialist would have won that election if it was actually democratic, if it represented the people. But because the donor class had a death grip on the primaries, it actually turned into an election between two extremely corrupt right-wing figures.
So this one, I'm not entirely convinced on. I thought Bernie just ended up not being as. I know he had a really he seemed really popular. I don't know if he was like during the primaries as popular as Clinton.
Okay, if you will do some research on that, you'll find that it's not unreasonable to say that that the primary was rigged in favor of Hillary. It's not an unreasonable conclusion, but also just opinion polls. Just polls basically there were a number of polls that there was polls that basically run Bernie versus Trump, Hillary versus Trump. Bernie versus Trump shows a big victory for Bernie. Hillary versus Trump, well, we all know how that ended. But the polls showed, Bernie versus Trump getting much better margins versus Trump. Okay, so Bernie was, at least if polls are to be trusted, Bernie would have had a much better chance of defeating Trump than Hillary. At least if you trust polls. I do. That's
if I give the
something you can easily look up.
Yeah, I will. I'm not familiar with the numbers, but
But the donor class didn't want Bernie. In fact, during one moment when a member of the donor class on MSNBC was a little bit too honest, he actually made the mistake of saying on air, "I'd vote for Trump over Sanders." He was speaking to Chris Matthews.
Yeah, I've heard.
But you see, the Democrats and the donor class didn't want a democratic socialist like Bernie Sanders. But the thing is that this is why I'd recommend watching the Larry Lessig video. Is if you're talking about minutiae or individual issues or individual candidates, it would be kind of difficult to do this scientifically, and there would be a lot of interpretation, personal preferences, maybe even personal bias that would come into it. But there actually is. Yeah, continue.
One of the biggest things that comes to mind, like when it comes to the popularity of Bernie, I know a lot of people. I loved how strongly he was rooting for the working class. Some of the things he might have done as president to back them up, but he was still essentially as close to a socialist in American politics as you can get. I feel like that in and of itself would have turned off a lot of people. So that's why I'm not entirely sure how well he. Sorry, once again, I'll look it up. But sorry, my other thing, just real quick, because I just want to cover this real quick, and then I'll let you finish up with your point, and then we got to wrap it up. What would you say this is true even on the local scale? Like super small town is still heavily influenced by the bigger donors within that town, and it's just completely corrupt, and everything's just kind of fucked.
I could speculate that might be the case, but I would hesitate to say so because I don't have statistics on that.
Okay.
So what I am confident to say is that based on what was actually government statistics that Dr. Larry Lessig cites in the video I sent you, but he's an expert on this, there is actually not much of a correlation between what normal people want and what the government does, but there's a very close correlation between what the donor wants and what the government does. And that's something that is actually empirical data. So I could speculate on lots of things. I think it's just inevitable that if you have inequality, you're going to end up having government favor the rich people. That's why I think the rich people need to be kept kind of in the same neighborhood as everyone, so that they want broadly the same things, so the government doesn't just end up hurting most of the people for the benefit of the few. And on that note, one other thing I want to propose is that I think there should be an estate tax of 10% annually on estates worth more than $1 million. That doesn't make it impossible to have an estate of more than $1 million. It doesn't make it possible to own a lot of wealth. It would tend to ensure, though, that over time, rather than estates building up, rather than estates becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, it would tend to suggest that over time, all other things equal, the tendency would be for estates worth more than $1 million to drop back down and kind of plateau at the $1 million. Because otherwise what ends up happening is just rich people who own a lot of property, it keeps going up. And I think that's very dangerous. A couple other things. I think residential buildings should be owned by people who live in them for at least 3 months of the year. And I think that should be true whether it's a house or an apartment building. I think if a landlord owns an apartment building, it should have to be an apartment building they live in for at least 3 months out of the year. Once again, to prevent concentration of power, and also just to ensure better landlords. Because I think a landlord who actually has to live in the year is probably going to do a better job. Or you could just, sell houses to the people who live in them. Which is a form of capitalism. It's not socialism to sell houses to people who buy houses. But it is a limit on inequality if you say the people who live in the houses should be the people who own them, or at least people who own the houses should live in them 3 months out of the year. And probably, and I wish I had saved more time for this, I think that voting stock in companies should be owned by people who are employees of the company. Now, the CEO, the founder, it could be an employee of the company, obviously. If you start a company and you're the CEO of the company, you're an employee. But I think it's very dangerous to have voting stock in companies owned by people who literally don't work there. Right, because that encourages lots of bad decisions. Yeah?
So you are almost for some sort of worker-owned businesses to an extent, not necessarily. Maybe the workers.
I think it's good for workers to own businesses, but I think it's good for workers to own business. I think if I were just to design a perfect business, it would be one in which everyone has an equal amount of stock, and everyone works together so that they all get money from that. But what I do believe is that businesses should be owned by people who work there. As opposed to investors who might just decide to, push the jobs over. If the business is owned by people who work there, and that can include the founder, if you found a business and you get, a lot of the benefits from that, that's fine. You're still an employee of the business. And you'll have, as the founder of the company, who continues to work there, you will have an interest in the long-term stability and survival of the company that you might not have if you're corporate raider who's trying to raise profits for 1 year so that you can sell it to a speculator the next year I think that leads to bad decisions bordering on gambling. So I think there would just be more stability in a good way if all businesses were owned by people who worked in the businesses. That could include the founder, because the founder and or CEO is an employee. Now, that doesn't mean there wouldn't be any investment. See, there is actually, some companies already have this. CD Projekt Red, for example, has a lot of this. They sell what's called investor stock, which is if you believe in how the company's doing and you think the company's well run and you think it's going to generate dividends, you invest. This does not give you a controlling interest in the company. It doesn't allow you to tell the company what to do, but it means that you get a share of their dividends. So if you're an investor as opposed to a speculator, and if you're an investor as opposed to someone who actually wants to take control of the business, it's fine. Because if it's a good company and you put your money there and you get a dividend, you're rewarded for that. But you don't actually, I think there's something very dangerous about having people who are essentially absentee landlords who have authority over a business.
Okay. I have said this before. I'm not entirely opposed to essentially, yeah, workers owning businesses or workers having more of a say in how businesses are run. Everything you just laid out isn't necessarily. I don't see anything objectionable with that necessarily. I need to look into all of this more. You have given me a lot of new ideas to think about, especially when it comes to that the system you proposed.
Okay, I'm very happy to hear that. I've spent about 20 years collecting these ideas from other people. So
well, yeah,
if I hope
well
I'm glad that you're thinking about that. So yeah, honestly that's the greatest compliment you've given me. So thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
Most of them aren't my ideas anyway.
Well, I mean, like,
I'm just kind of an aggregator.
almost none of anybody's ideas are actually legitimately theirs. We all collect and then kind of put crap together. But I think what I would like to do is I would like to do some research. I kind of want to review this talk on my own time, and I kind of dive deeper into this, and then maybe come back to you with some questions. How's that sound?
That sounds great. Honestly, I would very much like to do that. I think that good ideas are meant to be shared, and the fact that you're interested in these ideas indicates to me that they are good ideas. So yeah, you have my email. Just if you'd like to do another one of these later on, just let me know. I'm all for that.
Okay, sounds good. And I'll check out the links you sent me, as well as once again, just exploring all these topics a little bit more. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.